Welcome everybody to today's session. The title of this session is actually Ask the Experts, Building Enterprise Analytics Solutions with Azure Synapse Analytics. To engage with us, use the chat to ask questions. The questions will appear in the chat once they've been approved by the moderator. Experts will answer the questions here verbally, but also in the comments themselves. Once the session concludes, there'll also be more information given out. This session may be recorded. Help our moderators and try not to spam the chat too much. And please adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct, which is this. We have 6 subject matter experts here from the Synapse team. Would you guys introduce yourselves, please?
I'm Ewan Garden. I'm a program manager working on Spark in Synapse.
I'm Arnaud. I'm a product manager working on the platform and the connected services for Synapse.
Hi, I'm Nelly. I'm a program manager working on the data science and machine learning capabilities of Synapse.
And I saw you talking on mute, by the way. I was talking on mute, so I'm going to unmute, and I just talked over somebody else. My apologies. This is Mark. I'm a program manager for Synapse Pipelines and Data Flows. Okay, go for it. I can mute now again.
Hi, I'm Matt Usher. I'm a program manager working on competitive platform migrations to Azure Synapse.
Hi, I'm Veljko. I'm a program manager at Synapse SQL, focused on Synapse SQL serverless.
All right, let's get into the questions. Veljko, this is one for you. This is actually on dedicated SQL pools. Is there an auto scale or auto pause functionality for dedicated SQL pools?
Today, it's not available as a feature that you can automatically configure a service to do it for yourself. You can although configure it manually. However, this is a feature that we plan to deliver.
All right, thank you for that. Ewan, here's a question for you. How does Azure Synapse Analytics work with Delta Lake?
So we have support inside of the Spark engine for Delta Lake open source edition. So that's 0.6.1. Once we have support for Spark 3.0, we'll have support for Delta Lake 0.8. So Spark can read and write, and our other engines are going to add the capability to integrate with Delta Lake in the future.
Awesome. Arnaud, here's a question for you. What are the most common use cases for Synapse Link?
A common use case for Synapse Link is to do operational dashboarding, operational analytics to your operational system, I guess. And so that's basically one common use case we see a lot. And you should think about Synapse Link as being able to easily connect your system, operational system into Synapse and provide transformation with Spark, AI, ML. We have some scenarios around that over those scenarios, and as well, it's some kind of ELT pattern where you extract and load, and then you have an easy way to just transform your data, like create views and that. So that's a bit where we want Synapse Link to be.
Awesome. Mark, here's a question for you. Azure Synapse includes Synapse pipelines. How does this differ from ADF?
I am not muted. I'm not muted. So Synapse Pipelines is really essentially the same thing that you see in Azure Data Factory pipelines. So if you've used Data Factory for any period of time, you should be very comfortable inside of Synapse. It's really the same functionality. There may be a few things that we haven't quite completed porting over to Synapse yet, but we're working on pretty much all those things. But yeah, it's essentially the same code, the same thing that you see in Data Factory is Synapse Pipelines, and so is data flows are there as well.
All right, let's see where the next question is. All right, here's one for Velko. How is T-SQL streaming in Azure Synapse different than Azure Stream Analytics?
Hey, yeah, there shouldn't be any differences. Honestly, although I'm expert for SQL, for streaming T-SQL, I'm not the expert. So maybe somebody from the chat can also confirm, but I don't expect any differences there.
Okay, here's another question for our no. All the examples showing Synapse linked to Cosmos seem to require placing the key inside the query definition. Is there another way to create views using Synapse link that wouldn't require this?
Yes, we are working to make the same integration as what you have with Spark, where you are using directly the linked service name and you connect that. We are looking to have that so you don't need to put any key and that on the Synapse link for Cosmos DB. So that's coming.
Okay, let's see what the next question is. Here's one for Ewan. What is the best way to model the data for fast queries or big table approach? Or is this normalization encouraged?
I suspect that's actually a question for Velko.
Hey, yeah. So I kind of feel it's a bit of a broad question. So it will be good to have some more details. I think it also depends on what type of queries you're running. If you're doing like a point lookup, then I would assume the broad table would be better. I know maybe Matt has some experience if he would like to comment. Matt, maybe wave and we can turn you live.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add here. Sorry.
All right.
Here's another question for our no. Can you speak to the maturity of Purview vis-a-vis data catalog?
Okay, vis-a-vis data catalog, not well maintained. So well, no? Yeah, I have read full context. Okay. Hello? Yeah.
I was saying, I don't know, I can handle this one if you want, if it's a question about Purview.
Oh, Daniel, you are here. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Azure Purview is essentially a net new product that its scope is far greater than Azure Data Catalog Gen 1 is there. I believe I saw the question that there was not a lot of work being kind of done on that ADC Gen 1. As right now, there's no clear migration path in terms of there's not like a button you could click to take everything there. I would recommend just starting brand new with Purview right now because the scope of what you can do with your data governance is a lot greater. And if there's any sort of kind of follow-ups and specifics, I'm happy to answer that in the questions as well. But really, this is meant to have a much broader scope than what you would have in that first generation, which, yeah.
Okay, here's a question for Mark. Are there any plans for adding Delta Pool support via watermark in Synapse data flows?
I missed that first part. Adding Delta, what was it?
Delta
watermark.
Pool via watermark.
So there's a couple of things. So specific to, I'm assuming this is specific to pipelines. But typically when we do things like being able to do incremental loads is when we'll essentially use pipelines in sort of Delta pipeline modes. It's not necessarily specific to any one technology like, Delta Lake or anything like that, but the idea of a Delta pipeline is already built in to I don't say data factory, but built into pipelines in the way that you can incrementally load data and then you can execute that pipeline on a schedule, and then you can incrementally pick up data from the last time that you ran. We are actually working on building some additional sort of more built-in Delta loading features, incremental features into it. But we have customers that use pipelines in that way. They'll use change tracking as another interesting way to only pull incrementals. But we are looking at adding some more sort of easier ways to make Delta pipelines. We have templates in the gallery today that help you to have pipelines that are Delta incremental loading pipelines. I hope that answers the question, but could always post again, I guess, if I didn't hit the target on that one.
All right, let's see what the next question is. This one's for Velko. How does a dedicated SQL pool differ from a serverless SQL pool in use cases and performance?
All right, so today there are a few differences. So serverless SQL pool is tailored for querying the data in the lake. So queries the data that are stored in Azure Data Lake Gen 2 or in Azure Blob Storage, and it queries files such as Parquet and CSV. On the other hand, the dedicated SQL pool has an ability to query the data in the lake, but it also has the ability to ingest the data into itself and then provide better and more predictive performance. When it comes to like use cases, I saw one similar question before, so let me answer that one verbally as well. We recommend using serverless SQL pool for intermittent and ad hoc workloads, while for continuous workloads where the performance predictability is one of the more important factors, the dedicated SQL pool is recommended.
Okay, here's another question for you, Velko. Is there a way to make an ODBC or JDBC connection to the Synapse pool?
Yeah, I don't see any reasons why this shouldn't work. I'm expecting it to work in the same fashion as with connecting to a SQL server.
Here's a question for Ewan. On our project, we found it hard to load data to Synapse from Delta Lake. Is there some improvement to this coming?
That's something we would like to understand offline what the challenges are you're having, because the Delta Lake implementation is the open source implementation. All we've done is integrate it into the builds. So if you want to send me mail offline, EUANG@microsoft.com, then I'll dig into the details and we'll see if we can help you.
Here's a question for Arnaud. For Synapse Link, what sources are supported and what sources are planned?
So today it's Cosmos DB, and you have a MongoDB API and SQL API. We are looking later in 2021 to then SQL. So SQL database, first one, it should be in around, like Q3, Q4 2021, in the middle. Then it will be SQL Server Box, but that will be a bit later, probably more towards 2022. Then we will have as well Azure PostgreSQL, and that will be later. But the core goal is to get to Azure SQL Database and SQL MI. That's our first priority right now. And I have to as well add, there will be Dynamics FNO. We are looking to do things with Dynamics FNO, as well as Synapse Link for Dynamics FNO. So stay tuned.
Here's a question for Velko. Is Synapse dedicated pool supposed to be run full-time or only part-time to process data and then stop? What is the best practice and recommendations?
Yeah, the dedicated pool, in order to run the queries, it needs to be up and running. So although you can ingest the data and stop it, if you want to start running some select queries, you need to get it up and then run the select queries. So I wouldn't say is it one or the other. You can kind of mix things, but the important thing is, in order to run queries, either ingest the data or like run queries on top of the data that is ingested, the pool needs to be up.
Here's a question for Matt. Can you talk about Synapse Pathway, new features, limitations, so it can be converted to Synapse SQL jobs?
Sure, it's a great question. So today what Pathway supports is the ability to take SQL scripts out of SQL Server, Snowflake, and IBM Netezza and converts that into T-SQL that's compliant with Synapse SQL, with the SQL engines in Synapse. Today it really is it just is in preview. We launched yesterday, and it supports, you know, the basic alter, create, drop statements, undrop statements, those kinds of things for database, schema, and table objects. The intent is to build out full capabilities from all of those source languages. So we have already announced things like Teradata and Redshift and Amazon Redshift and Google BigQuery, as well as others, that these will be languages that will be able to take the full source of that language, things like functions and views and select statements, and be able to convert those over to the T-SQL that's targeting. We'll also at some point include a connected experience, so being able to allow you to go in and investigate an existing system. So you'd be able to open the tool, connect to your Teradata instance, be able to pull all the appropriate data out, convert it, and then automatically deploy it for you into a Synapse SQL instance.
All right, let's see what the next question is. Here's another question for you, Matt. Is there a way outside of a special Azure DevOps test to migrate Synapse Workspace artifacts between environments?
That's probably not a question for me. I more work on like migration of product. The question is really, how do I take artifacts out of one and move to another? Is this really like, I'm assuming the question is about like, I have a create table statement in one instance and I want to be able to deploy that in another. Assuming that that's the case, you could do this a couple of ways. Given that we have integrated Git operations in each one of the instances, you could just point each Azure Synapse Workspace to the same source GitHub repository and be able to pick and pull out of that. That's one way of doing it. You could obviously have automated deployment scripts using things like SSDT, so have DAC packs that are created and deployed on each one of the instances. So you kind of have a little bit of flexibility here based on what your requirements are.
Okay, the next question is there, this is for Mark, is there a way for Synapse Pipeline to read JSON data from a SQL table that is stored in an nvarchar column? It seems to treat it as a string instead of a collection.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a, sorry, is my mic on? Yes, it is. If it is an nvarchar, then you're going to read it as a string. You know, naturally, it's kind of the way that it is, the data type is on the source. But if you want to treat it as hierarchical data, if you want to actually work with it as if it were JSON, what you would do is you add a data flow onto your pipeline. And then inside the data flow, there's a transformation that's called parse. Okay, and then parse will take that string and it will turn it into a JSON. You can identify the fields and the properties within that JSON string that you want. So that's taking a string, a varchar, and turning that into a hierarchical if it is JSON. You can do that through pipeline plus data flow, parse transformation. Hey, Ryan, should I click on these after you read them to us, by the way? Should I say publish or?
No, you're all good.
Okay, good.
All right, let's see what the next question is. Or no, this is a question for you. What, if any, is the advantage of staging all data in Synapse first, then reporting on it in Power BI versus directly loading and referencing the dispersed data directly from Power BI?
I think I had the data then reporting on it with that's really like a more
yeah.
Sorry, I'm reading the question. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I can answer it. So yeah. This is Veljko. So yeah, if you have like if you have a single CSV file, like yeah, go ahead, read it from Power BI directly. It's all good, right? However, if you have like more complex tables that consist of multiple files that go in a larger scale, then like you will start seeing Power BI not being able to deliver the performance that it can on a smaller scale. Additionally, if you, for example, want to project some columns immediately, not load the full data set into the CSV, project some columns, do some filtering on some where conditions, even do some like more complex transformations of the data before it gets into the Power BI. These are all the reasons to go through Synapse.
Here's another question for you, Velko. What is the difference between Azure SQL DW Gen 2 and Azure Synapse?
All right, so the Azure SQL DW Gen 2 is a product that is mature and exists for more than a couple of years now. And Azure Synapse is the evolution of SQL Data Warehouse. And it, in addition to including the SQL Data Warehouse as a dedicated SQL pool, it has a bunch of other capabilities that usually people use when they are creating analytical solutions, like including the pipelines to transform the data, move the data from one source to another, including the Spark, including Synapse SQL serverless to do the data in the lake. And on top of all of that, you get the Synapse Studio as a single IDE to work over all of these capabilities. And additionally, like if you think about a few years ago, there was multiple services that you had to put together yourself in order to get this full analytical stack, which Synapse brings today out of the box within a single product.
For Mark, what is the benefit to data pipelines within Synapse Analytics as opposed to using it just in ADF?
Interesting question. Yeah, it's a good question, and it comes up a lot. So, like we said earlier, is that Data Factory pipelines is really, I guess I'd say the opposite. Synapse Pipelines has the same capability that Data Factory Pipelines has. It's really the same thing. So it's more the sort of the single pane of glass, if you will. You're in that single solution environment for your analytics within Synapse. And so basically, if you're going to be doing work in Synapse, the place to do the ETL and the data integration is in Synapse Pipelines. You can absolutely do it in ADF, but ADF is more typically used for larger ETL-specific teams that they're doing ETL to many different sort of systems and sources and destinations. But if you're, in the Synapse world, this is the place to do the pipelines. There's a few things you may find here and there that haven't ported over yet into Synapse, but we're working on burning those things down in the next couple of months.
For Ewan, is there a way of executing .NET similar to how we can in SQL Server? I'm curious if I can execute a UDF that executes .NET.
Simple answer is absolutely yes. There is an open source project that we built before we even had Synapse that allows you to execute C# and F# inside of Spark. You can actually run it on any of the Spark versions out there, but it's included by default inside of Synapse, such that if you have a notebook, one of the languages you can pick in your notebook is C#.
For Mark again, would Synapse Pipelines be suitable for near real-time data ingestion with SAP to dedicated SQL Pool?
Let me answer it this way. So pipelines, both in ADF and Synapse, are built around or predicated on the idea of batch orientation. So you can get as low as 1 minute increments from a schedule trigger within pipelines, but it's not geared toward real time. Now, real time is a loaded word, and of course, you could say near real time. So in most cases that I found over the years with ETL and with Data Factory before we had Synapse Pipelines was that those sort of several minute increments for a batch usually met the target with those. But in terms of having an always running pipeline in an actual real time, like an event-based architecture is something that is not there yet within pipelines or Factory, to be honest with you. It's really batch oriented.
For Velko, can Synapse Serverless SQL support row-level security on external tables?
Today it cannot, but it is planned. The dedicated managed data does support it. So there's the plan to expand that support to serverless and to external data as well. Let me just actually add one more thing. What we see, sorry for messing up the stream, but what we see people doing is creating views that are joining the data that has kind of a dictionary that contains which the username and the column value that they are able to see. And then through this joining, they kind of manually create row level security. So that's one way to achieve it if you need it like right now. But this is something that we have in our plans to deliver.
For Ewan, do Synapse notebooks have IntelliSense or autocomplete capabilities?
They do today, and we're working on a set of updates where we're actually going to share the IntelliSense backend with the Azure Machine Learning team, the Azure Notebooks team, and the Visual Studio team. And so the IntelliSense should get more correct, faster, and also look a little more modern. So short answer, yes today, but even better in the future.
For Mark, for creating integration pipeline objects via CLI or the UI, is there a difference in behavior?
Difference in behavior. So if you're going to create objects using the CLI, you're essentially using the SDK to publish changes. So the UI has integration with Gits and CI/CD to be able to work in branches and then merge and publish and have that kind of environments. But I mean, essentially, there isn't any difference, right? It's just the UI gives you that environment to be able to build the JSONs underneath that are used by the CLI or the essentially any of the command line tools or SDKs for Data Factory. The biggest difference, obviously, is the UI drives all of that within the code-free pipelines. The properties that you see there should all be there in the SDK, whether that's PowerShell or whatever it is. So I would probably say, just to kind of give you a quick and short answer, I would say no. Should I say no? It depends. No, let's just say no.
For Velko, is there ability for always encrypted for Synapse SQL Pools?
To my knowledge, it's not available right now, but it is planned.
And a question for Ewan. Does Azure Synapse support data streaming functionality?
The API is supported, but there are characteristics of a streaming cluster, assuming you're talking about Spark streaming, that today our clusters don't support. You want the cluster to be able to run forever and things like that. Most of the customers we talked to who want real-time streaming, and I think it was Velko that talked about this earlier, actually want microbatch. And so they want something triggered every 15 minutes or something like that. So that's a scenario we're focusing on right now. We'll get to streaming, but I wouldn't say streaming is a first-class citizen today.
All right, and that just about wraps it up for today. I want to thank everybody for coming today. I want to thank all of our subject matter experts. For more resources, you can go to aka.ms WAC Learn at Ignite. Thank you, everybody, and have a nice day.